Hello, everyone. Today we are recording with John Ironmonger, one of our lovely authors, Flower on the Wall Press, and we have a very impressive selection of your books in front of us. I don't know if you guys can see, but the first ever book that John wrote, this was out
in 1994.
1994.
It was.
Quite a while ago.
It was a guide to UK zoos and wildlife parks, and yeah.
And this says it's fully up to date.
It was.
That's literally what the back cover says, fully up to date. Covers the current crisis at London Zoo. Whoa. There's a lovely rhino as well. What was the crisis?
Well, the crisis was, and the book was due to be published, it was HarperCollins, and it was due to be published in 1993, around about Easter, because they decided that was the best time for a zoo guide to come out. And just before Easter, in about January, February time, London Zoo suddenly announced they were going to close. And my editor called me in and said, we can't put the book out without mention of that in it. And I said, well, can we put something in quick? And he said, it's too late because we won't get it out in time for Easter. So it'll have to come out next year. And I said, but a lot of the zoos will have changed by next year.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you'll have to visit them all again.
Oh,
so I'd visited all 150 zoos in there.
Wow.
To prepare for the first edition, and I had to go around them all again to do
the star rating for
the
zoos.
Second edition. Yeah,
I'm fascinated by this. This was absolutely not what I intended to go into depth by, but now I'm fully distracted. So you rated every single zoo in the UK?
Not every single zoo, only the good zoos. I missed out a lot of the rubbish little places.
There's one in Inverness.
There was Highland Wildlife Park, Kingussy. Yes, yes, that was quite nice. Yes, I don't even know if it's still there. It's a long time. After I'd done all the zoos twice, I didn't visit a zoo again for quite a long time.
Yeah. So after you visited all the zoos,
yes.
So you're a former zoologist and
I'm
an
a
expert
zoologist.
in freshwater leeches, I believe.
So apparently so, yes.
Although you don't feel like you are anymore.
Definitely not anymore.
No. So this inspires, I would say, your work quite a lot because we have lots of animals in your work. We have a lovely whale. Is it a blue whale? I've forgotten.
It's a fin whale.
A fin whale.
Fin whale, yes.
A fin whale. And maybe briefly, without spoiling, how does the whale end up, just so that people know?
How does the whale end up?
How does he end up on this beach in Cornwall?
He gets washed up on a beach, and really that's all you need to know. You need to know that it's a very small village in Cornwall. A whale gets washed up on the beach. There's a newcomer to the village who's sort of fled there from a financial crisis in London, and he helps the villagers rescue the whale and become something of a local hero because of it. And it's all set against the background of a global pandemic.
Yeah. When I read this, I thought John was predicting the future because I read this after COVID, and this was written quite a few years before COVID.
It was published in 2014.
Yeah.
Yes.
So John had no way of knowing this was what was going to happen to the world. So indeed, it reads like a really interesting look at this kind of apocalyptic time that we all lived through. And indeed, this really took off in Germany, didn't it?
It did. And I think really because it came out in the UK in 2014 and its sort of shelf life had gone by the time COVID came along. But in Germany, it came out in 2020. And it just happened to hit the zeitgeist there, really.
Yes.
And everyone said, oh, this is a pandemic book.
Yeah.
And it did extraordinarily well there. And it was in the top 10 paperback charts for about 50 weeks.
They sold 500,000 copies worldwide, which is phenomenal. And indeed, it's a really interesting thing about John's work because most of John's books start in Germany before they do the UK or at the same time. So I believe we published The Wager and the Bear last year, and I believe this was out in Germany before the UK.
Yes, because the whale did so well in Germany, they were really anxious to get off with another one. So that as soon as The Wager and the Bear was available, really, they snapped it straight up and it came out quite quickly, yes. And The Angel of St. Piran is going to come out simultaneously in German and in English.
Yeah.
And I should say I don't speak any German, but I do love the Germans because they do buy my books.
In English and German, right? That's quite interesting. They like to read in translation and in the original language.
Yes, it's quite funny. I've done a few book signings in Germany where people have come along with English language copies of the books for me to sign. Yeah.
And this will probably not be your first hardback of your career, but it's the first hardback in the trade for Flower on the Wall. So really exciting. So it'll be in September.
It is exciting. It's funny for an author to do a hardback because in a way the hardback it's exciting to have a hardback because it feels like a much more permanent book. But at the same time, you know that you're really not going to sell a lot of copies until it gets into the paperback.
The paperback.
So you you want the hardback to sort of generate some interest and excitement, and hopefully that's what it will do. And I'm very excited that it's coming out in hardback. And
one of my favourite things about this is that we've added in illustrations from your wife.
Yes.
Who's done these gorgeous illustrations. And indeed, the chimpanzees in this book are very much, I don't know if you're able to see from that distance, but they're very much their own personalities, aren't they? They are characters within their own right. They're treated with, I would say, the same respect as the human characters in here.
They are. And in a sense, that's part of the book. And the little tagline on the book says, "We're all apes, aren't we?" And it really, I suppose, makes the point that, what is the value of an ape any more than the value of a human, or vice versa. So I think, yes, the apes do have their own personalities and their own family lives and their own, families and so on. Yes, they do.
Infighting, and they're wild chimpanzees. And Angel is our sort of protagonist that we follow. She's a former gymnast. She goes to work with the chimpanzees in the treetops, which is a really interesting angle.
Well, I remember, and I can't remember what year it was. I've been writing this book for a long time. Actually, I've had 2 or 3 other books out while this book is still being sort of slowly cooking.
Yeah.
And I remember watching a documentary about a young woman who was studying chimpanzees, I think, in Gabon. And seeing a film of her sort of standing at the bottom of a tree, looking up at the chimps who were quite high up in the tree, and it just crossed my mind: what if she was a gymnast? What if she could climb the trees? What would she learn? And that just sort of sparked the idea, and off I went with this book. And it took a long time to do. And yes, my wife Sue used to be a council member at Chester Zoo, interestingly enough, and Chester Zoo has Europe's largest colony of chimpanzees. And while she was there working or doing whatever she needed to do at the zoo, and she used to do publicity for the zoo, I would often just go and watch the chimpanzees there. And they had a really interesting group of chimpanzees, and I've really taken the characters and personalities of some of those chimps and transplanted them into this little group of chimps in the forest. Yes.
Yeah. It's funny, some of the chimps in here are a lot smarter than others. And as Angel kind of watches them interact, they're going through this sort of shift in leadership, aren't they? Which will really determine whether they kind of survive, because there is this angle to this that would you say it's too much of a giveaway to give away the twist? I think probably not, based on the back. What we've gone from the blurb. But the chimps and their survival kind of will depend on who is in charge, who leads them, the way they communicate with Angel, because once the billionaires come onto this island, their survival is threatened. And indeed, the island is no longer a conservationist island at that point, is it? So
that's right. Yes, right. And I think it's it is a story about trophy hunting, and it's a story particularly about Angel, who's the central character who goes to work with these chimps and believes that she can communicate with them. Whether she really can or not, we kind of leave that to the reader to decide. And I rather think she can. She knows how to communicate with the chimps. She feels that she understands their language, even if they're not using a direct language. They have a kind of body language. They have noises. They have gestures, and she can interpret these. And by communicating with the chimps, she can basically help them to thwart or to outwit this little group of, like you say, billionaire trophy hunters who come onto their island. It is a story about trophy hunting, and it's a story particularly about Angel, who's the central character who goes to work with these chimps and believes that she can communicate with them. Whether she really can or not, we kind of leave that to the reader to decide. And I rather think she can. She knows how to communicate with the chimps. She feels that she understands their language, even if they're not using a direct language. They have a kind of body language. They have noises. They have gestures, and she can interpret these. And by communicating with the chimps, she can basically help them to thwart or to outwit this little group of, like you say, billionaire trophy hunters who come onto their island hoping to shoot themselves a chimpanzee. Yes. And at that moment on, it becomes, if you like, a kind of nail-biting story of, who's going to go first.
Yeah.
And
a little bit grisly towards it. I mean, I think that is one of the interesting things about John's work, is that, you know, people might see an animal and think, oh, we've got a cozy narrative here. I mean, in some way, I think the tone of your work is kind of like a classic storyteller, I would say, like when a story is being read around a fire, and it feels really welcoming. And sort of, perhaps initially you think it will be cozy, and then it gets into these sort of social themes that are actually, you know, deep and nuanced, and opening up these discussions in this about trophy hunting, and, you know, whether we are any more, you know, whether we have any more sort of meaning or, I don't know, power over the world than an ape does, for example, or what our similarities and differences are, what our humanity is, what level of humanity an ape has, whether that's important to them. And indeed, you know, in The Wager, we have a really interesting moral argument about climate change, and the people in power, because later this Cornish MP, who initially does not believe in climate change, it's not really within his best interest to, he wants to become the PM, and he has to really wipe his record, doesn't he?
he does.
Obviously, you can't be the PM denying climate change. So this book begins with a kind of viral argument between the MP and an activist, kind of follows them throughout their lives. So I think all of your novels are quite nuanced in there. The characters are taking us on these kind of social argument journeys, if you like,
Yes.
throughout morality. And
yes, and it's interesting because if you like, the MP in this, who becomes the Prime Minister, it is, and I always thought he would be a villain. But as I wrote the book, he didn't turn out to be a villain quite so much. I mean, he just turned out to be stupid, really. But I think
who did we say we wanted to play him in a film to illustrate that kind of, like, was it Rory Kinnear?
Possibly somebody like Rory Kinnear would do a good
He's
job.
done a few prime ministers.
He'd make a good Monty. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was in The Diplomat as the British Prime Minister, and he was very, you know, bumbling fool in that.
But I would say that, and normally I struggle to write villains, but I do think that in The Angel, the trophy hunters genuinely are villains.
Yeah.
They are not nice people.
You can tell that in the way that you've written them.
and I suppose that reflects to some extent my, you know, how I feel about trophy hunting as a, you know, as a thing.
Yes. I mean, there's no nuance on that, is there? I guess in The Wager and the Bear, there's a nuance to Monty, and he has a redemption arc. But, you know, can we really redeem someone who kills animals for fun and for glory? You know, and indeed, if they don't have a redemption arc, there might be a taking them down kind of arc that we go on instead.
It becomes a Jack Reacher novel, if you like, with yes, with Angel as the avenging angel.
Yes.
Yes.
So if I have two last questions for you, maybe a fun one and then a sort of takeaway one.
Okay.
So if you had to say to someone to start somewhere with your novels, and we haven't talked about all of them actually, if someone had to start somewhere from your novels that was sort of quintessentially John Ironmonger book, where should they start?
That's such a hard question, really, because it's always like asking a parent, you know, which child would they put forward for something. I suspect I would probably say to start with would be The Whale at the End of the World, which is also sold as Not Forgetting the Whale, which was its original title. And it's interesting that the publisher changed the title from Not Forgetting the Whale to The Whale at the End of the World to reflect the German title.
Yeah.
But I think this kind of introduces you very much to the world and the kind of issues I wanted to talk about and the kind of characters who live in it. And then very much these three books run as a companions to one another. They're not sequels, but they're all
set in Cornwall.
They're all set in the same village in Cornwall, yes.
Yeah. I'm describing it recently as St. Piran. This is a fictional town in Cornwall. Has kind of the ability to create kind of magical or really impressive people who are sort of, you know, maybe informed by the mythology of Cornwall, but then go on to do wonderful things and are able to maybe advocate for humanity in some way. It seems to be the kind of town where you'd want to be born so that you were someone special.
I suppose that's interesting. That it is full of rather special people, but they my mother was Cornish, and she grew up in a little town called Mevergissey, which is a little Cornish coastal village. And when my father retired, I was 17. We all moved down to Mevagissey and to live there. And my parents bought the village shop. And it was the first time I hadn't lived in a city. And I found myself in this little tiny Cornish town. And of course, I was 17. I hated it. It was not really the kind of bright lights and glamorous and exciting place that I wanted to live. But very soon, really very soon, perhaps it was because we ran the village shop, and as the village shopkeepers, we did get to know everybody. But very soon I realized what an incredibly amazing place this was. Everybody knew everybody else. Everybody looked after everyone. There was this sort of self-supporting community of people. Quite isolated, particularly in the winter, when the visitors weren't there. And I always wanted to write about this village. So St. Piran for me is a smaller, slightly more encapsulated version of Mevagissey, where I grew up. And it is full of very interesting people, as indeed I think probably every village in the country is in some way or another. Yes.
Thinking of this has changed my last question for you, because I know that all of your books are set somewhere where you have been, either for research or it inspires the book. And so for the Angel of St. Piran, can you tell us a little bit about Tanzania and your experiences there?
Well, I grew up in Kenya, so I was born in Nairobi and I lived in Nairobi until I was 17. So I and really just that was where I lived, in the country I knew, and I sailed around Lake Victoria with my mother when I was a child, really. I think I was about 11, 12 years old. And that was into Tanzania and then through Uganda. And it was just a fascinating, wild, dramatic place, Lake Victoria. And it still is. I went back there a few years ago with my son to revisit Lake Victoria. And I just sort of thought it was a wonderful setting to set this story. I wanted the forest where the chimpanzees were to be isolated, so it's on an island. And there are islands in Lake Victoria which do have populations of chimpanzees on. So it's not an unrealistic idea. So yes, it's a part of the world that I absolutely love, that I feel at home in. I speak a little bit of the language, and I just wanted to introduce people to that part of the world, really, and make it part of the story.
Do you know how to say goodbye?
Kwaheri.
Yeah. So, Kwahili.
Kwaheri.
Kwaheli.
Kwaheri. Dio.
Kwaheli, scribblers. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Isabel. It's been lovely talking to you.